But thanks everyone for being here. And I just wanted to share a couple of ideas that can help reshape how you relate to your environment, both the built environments as well as the social environment, to get you to think about space differently. And I think this topic is important because more and more these days, we find ourselves living in built environments. We are substituting a human-built world for the natural world. In fact, about a decade ago, we passed a tipping point. More than half of the world's population now lives in cities and other urban environments. That proportion is predicted to rise to 66%, nearly 2/3 of the world's entire population by 2050. So I think taking some time to reflect on how we relate to the built environments, the architecture that surrounds us, and the cities that increasingly surround us is more important than ever. Not just reflecting about technical details, mechanical details, for instance, provision of water and electricity, or the pollution problem that the previous video talked about and took steps to address. Not these issues of sustainability, not just these issues, but more deeper, more fundamental questions of how we as people relate to the built environment, how the human spirit is or is not affected by this new human-built world. And I found that Hong Kong actually offered many perfect examples of the ideas and themes that I wanted to convey in this talk. And so I'm going to be using a lot of photographs from my time here, both to elucidate, explain my ideas, and also as a kind of to honor and appreciate the time that I've been here. So let's take a look at this first photo. This is one of the first things that I saw coming to Hong Kong. I think I actually maybe took this a couple days after I landed. And I was just on a bus, I was on the top deck, taking in the sights. And this isn't anything special by Hong Kong standards. There are comparatively few people. The traffic's not that bad. But coming from a small college in kind of more the rural parts of the United States, this still astonished me with the sheer amount of activity, the sheer amount of human activity. It seemed a never-ending stream of busyness. Something was always going on. Let's look at another example. This also astonished me, but for different reasons. This was taken more recently, about a month ago, in Hong Kong's Chilin Nunnery. And it astonished me because after 6 or 7 months of living in Hong Kong, I was really surprised to find a place that had such quiet, such calm and peace. It was a welcome change of pace from the kind of frantic pace of everyday life in Hong Kong. And I was really appreciative of this. But what I want to do now is compare these two photos to try and give you a sense of the ideas I want to talk about. So I would argue that in a way, these photos, the scenes depicted in these photos, are different in a deeper, more fundamental way than you might initially think. In fact, I'm going to argue that, objectively speaking, the scene depicted here has more life than the scene depicted here. It's more alive, it's more vibrant. I can envision different activities. Taking a walk, talking with a friend, writing in my journal, reading a book, taking some time just to observe a particular tree or rock that catches my eye. I have a fundamentally different sensation in places like these as opposed to places like these and much of the other places in Hong Kong. Different activities. In this one, I don't envision the same activities. I can't really imagine stopping somewhere and having a chat with my friends. I feel rushed, even channeled or funneled. This isn't a place for stopping and doing meaningful things or reflecting on something. This is a place where you go because you're going somewhere else, right? You're going to the mall or you're going to the MTR station, but you're not stopping there. You're on your way somewhere else. That is fundamentally different than this one. As I say, I think this is more alive. And obviously, I am not using life in the mechanical, biological definition necessarily or strictly. I am going beyond that mechanical definition. I'm arguing, in fact, that life is a fundamental attribute of space. All space, everywhere. Cities, forests, lakes, other planets, everywhere. Every bit of space has a greater or lesser degree of life, objectively. And that may seem ridiculous to go so far beyond the mechanical definition of life as you and I are some sort of self-replicating patterns of particular elements in a particular configuration. So let me ask you this. When you think of your own lives, do you think of it in mechanical terms, like you're describing an animal? You go, well, I ate today, and I drank some liquids, so my body's feeling pretty good. I tried to reproduce successfully or unsuccessfully, and then I think I'm just going to get up tomorrow and keep doing that until my body eventually wears out and I die. But as long as I can, have some offspring and future generations, then I've kind of accomplished what I set out to do. You think of it in terms of these like mechanical things, this kind of checklist, or do you think sometimes about things that you call hopes, or dreams, or wishes, visions of a future that doesn't exist, a longing, a desire for something that you can't even give a name to necessarily, but you feel drawn to something? If you do, then I am sorry to say that you too have strayed beyond the merely mechanical definition of life. And I'm simply asking you to imagine with me that that intangible definition of life doesn't just extend to yourself, but extends outside of yourself, to other people, to living matter and non-living matter. That particular configurations of space, whether they be living organisms such as you and I in this room, or the cities that surround us, the buildings that surround us in Hong Kong, but these different configurations have an objective measure of life. And that changes the way we see things. So, how can we get a better handle on this? How can we get a better understanding of how exactly space creates life? Well, a lot of what I'm discussing here today was inspired by a very great architect by the name of Christopher Alexander. And I work here at this university as an English tutor, and sometimes students tell me, I'm having difficulty with my reading assignments. It's taking me forever. How many of you have had world history class? Hands up if you've taken world history. You find it, the readings, there are a lot of readings, weren't there? It takes you a long time. Well, the book that I've been reading, that with the ideas that I've been wrestling with, that I'm presenting here before you today, it took me about 8 years to finish that book. Actually, just finished it a couple of weeks ago in preparation for this event. Anyway, Christopher Alexander said that we can understand space in a different way by thinking in terms of centers. And it may be difficult to define centers necessarily. It's not necessarily like the middle of something, but every bit of space is composed of centers. Centers you can think of as kind of bits of organized space. They have some coherence to them. They are separate from the rest of the space around it. And these centers combine in different ways to produce some whole. And the whole is greater than the sum of its parts. These centers interact meaningfully to create some organization in space, which Christopher Alexander argued resulted in a greater or lesser degree of life. Centers could be anything. It could be chairs, it could be these doors behind you, it could be this window, it could be you and I. Living things are also centers. If you want an example, take people. Individuals interact with each other in meaningful ways, and by themselves would not be able to produce anything necessarily. But our interactions collectively create a whole that we call society. And if individuals did not interact with each other at all, there would be no such thing as society. And if the elements that make you and I living organisms were separated equally and did not interact with each other, there would be no possibility for life. So the notion of trying to connect life to space may not be as strange as immediately apparent. But anyway, let's look at some centers, shall we? If you look at this photo on the right, what's the center? Can you see it? What draws your eye the most? Is it the buildings? Is it the boat in the foreground? What do you think is the center here? The sun? Yes, exactly. Look at it. It dominates the picture. The eye is drawn towards it inevitably. The buildings vanish into the distance, arriving at the sun. Even the posts draw your eye. The posts in the foreground here draw your eye past the boats to the sun. The sun dominates the picture. The sun is the center. But the posts are centers too. They interact with each other. They attract the eye, and then to move on to the greater center, the sun. But it doesn't need to be anything as dramatic as that. These lanterns, too, act as centers. They're bits of organized space. They have a pleasing color. They interact with each other. They interact with the purple lights. And so your eye goes to the lanterns, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And then you see the light up above in the bamboo scaffolding. And then maybe your eye goes down a little bit to see the blue light over there with the people in the light. That's another center. All space is composed of centers. And when you start looking for them, you'll find them everywhere. And they change how you think, how you look at the world around you. There's a building in Macau I saw. It really struck me, really captured my attention. There's so many centers in this photo. These windows, or these archways, right? The light coming through them, each one of these is a center. They strengthen each other. They repeat in a similar pattern. Even these grates down here, each one of these little ones is a center that interact with each other to form something greater. These clover patterns in between, I don't know if you can see them, but they're up there between the archways. Those are also centers. And look at how they're interacting with each other. They're not just drawing your eye horizontally, but they draw your eyes up vertically to the region of the blue sky, outlined in contrast with light. The sky itself is a center. The tree off to the left is a center. The building, the tree, and the sky all are also interacting with each other. Centers don't need to be necessarily explicitly designed, but the building certainly is. Even something like a blank sheet of paper, a blank white space, by itself, perfectly flat, no light. But put a few black marks in the middle, and suddenly you get a totally different sensation. How could that be? You may or may not agree with the definition of life that I'm giving here, but the space does have life, at least to the extent that it is reflected in the meaning that you and I give it. For us, we have a fundamentally different sensation looking at this than mere blank white space. Living things, like I said, can also be centers. Including cats. Sometimes these organisms are so particularly astoundingly lazy that one may mistake them for non-living material. Don't be fooled. Cats can be centers too. Now you may think, isn't this all subjective? Like saying one thing or another, one scene or another is more alive or less alive, that one building is more beautiful than another. Perhaps in part it is subjective. We all come from different backgrounds with different experiences, different ideas. We all have a unique way of looking at things. But discounting this kind of individual experience or measurements of life comes from a mechanical point of view. That if it's not completely independent of what we think, that we can arrive at some objective measure of it outside of ourselves, then it's not valuable, it's useless. But I would say that that's not true. I would say that there is a largely objective measurement that we can arrive at in trying to understand the degree of life in one scene or another. Christopher Alexander had a test called the mirror of the self test that he used to try and get people to see which thing had more life than another. And he put it something like this. Which one makes you feel more alive? Which one makes you feel more human? Which one, looking at these scenes that we have here, this is the Grand Millennium Plaza and this is a seminary church in Macau. Which one makes you feel your humanity expand or contract? Which one makes you feel more human, more alive? Is it this one with the skyscrapers surrounding everything? tiny people in the foreground? Or is it this simple church with the light coming in through the doors? Let's do a quick measure. If you think that the right photo, this one with the skyscrapers, makes you feel more alive, more human, raise your hand. If you think the left-hand photo with light coming in through the door and you can see out, if you think that one makes you feel more alive, more human, raise your hand. Okay, we've got a pretty good consensus there. I'd say maybe that's a 80-20 split, something like that. But that's just one sampling. But it goes to show you that perhaps talking about the life of space is not so entirely subjective after all. All right. And I think these questions are more important than ever, like I said, because we're living in more and more urban environments, cities. And since we are increasingly substituting this human-built world for the natural one, more and more the built environments becomes a reflection of who we are. Learning to think in centers is important because fundamentally there's no difference between us and the external environments. You as a person do not exist entirely without defining yourself in relation to other people. By yourself, you are weak. But together with other people, you are stronger than you could be on your own. Works the same thing with architecture. A building by itself is weak. One center by itself is weak. But centers interacting with each other can create something much stronger. But technology, modern technology that we've used to build these cities, seems to have a weakening effect on these centers. Look at this. This is the casino from Macau, or one of them anyway. There are a bunch of centers here maybe, but they're interacting with each other in a weird way. It's all flat. It's more homogeneous. Seems less alive. Technology allows us to create unnatural forms, and that's not a bad thing. It's enabled us to do wonderful, great things. But is this the kind of environment that we want? Or do we want some other kind of environment that makes us feel more alive and gives us more potential for meaningful human action? That's why I'm trying to get you to think in terms of centers, to reshape how you think about the external environment, because it can tell you something important about yourself. Technology has also made us weaker as centers, perhaps. We are more connected with each other than ever before in some ways. We can communicate with each other instantaneously, anywhere, at any time. But do you really think that the quality of those connections has increased with technology or declined? Look at these people. They're all looking at the same thing. But how many of them are really genuinely sharing that experience with each other? Technology, too, may have had a weakening effect on us as centers. That's why I want to leave you with this message, that trying to think in terms of centers is important, because it redefines our relationship, not just to the built environment, not just to architecture, but to each other as well. Because you cannot consider yourself isolated from the external environment. The more that you do that, the more cut off you feel, the weaker you are as a center. But by learning to observe centers around us, where it is everywhere in life, by looking at space in a fundamentally different way, you're not just reflecting on buildings or cities, not just reflecting on how to make things prettier. It's more fundamental than that. You're also thinking about life itself, and you're thinking about the kind of world that you want to live in. By strengthening centers, both in our buildings and in ourselves, by strengthening those connections, we can create an architecture of built environments more conducive to human life, to meaningful human action. And in so doing, we also reflect on ourselves and how we can connect more strongly with each other to build a stronger society. And so I leave you with these words. Look at the centers around you, and you may find centers in yourself again. Thank you.